And then we'll move into a cloud overview. And after I finish the cloud overview, I'll turn it over to my colleagues, as Norm mentioned, Karl Fernstrom from Minnesota Department of Health and Tricia Cox from the Utah Department of Technology Services to talk about their actual experiences with leveraging cloud solutions to support APCDs. And then we'll leave questions at the end for any follow-up questions you all may have about the material and then next steps. So with no further ado, I'll move us along.
I know. Everything is blocked. I have the flip thing on.
I apologize. Can you all see me?
We can see it. It's just the other, for some reason, Zoom is giving us all fits today. I think there must be a bug at headquarters or something.
No worries. 1 second. I'll resume. 1 second.
All right, no problem.
Okay, let me just pull it back here.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry about that. We'll come back on screen here. All right, wonderful. Are we all set? Wonderful.
I'm not seeing it just yet. So.
Okay. All right, how about now?
There we go.
All right, wonderful, and we're back. So as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, I am a part of Health and Human Services State and Local Government Division, specifically focused in the healthcare provider space. And when I say healthcare provider, my part of the team is focused on really working with healthcare systems, hospitals, ambulatory clinics, federally qualified health centers, et cetera, that are state and locally owned or partially owned by state and local funding. So we really look to help those organizations enable their cloud strategies and healthcare solutions that may be running on the cloud to optimize care and optimize their business. That being said, we also are responsible for helping states work on their APCD strategies and on the cloud and how we can help to support those. And so we'll talk about those APCD enablement strategy capabilities here in a second, but that's a little bit about our group. So we spoke at the top of the hour about really needing to talk about healthcare cost landscape when you're talking about an APCD. And I know most of you on this call are familiar with this space and have been in that space for some time. But for those of you who may not spend most of your time in this space, when you really look at the US healthcare costs in this country, the US really constitutes greater than 40% of all global healthcare spending. And that's a pretty grim number, but when you look at that, you would think what we would have better healthcare outcomes, and we do not. We have the lowest performance per spend of all nations. And when you look at that growth of our healthcare spend in our country as a percentage of GDP, we really increased from 5% to 20% of GDP spend from 1960 to 2020. 50% of our healthcare spend in our economies as of 2019 was focused on providers, that being hospitals, physicians, and then of course, actual delivery of clinical care. And when you look at the landscape of how people receive insurance and care, 54% of US citizens receive their health insurance through their employer. And so these probably come as no surprise to most of you, but for some, if this is not really your stomping ground every day, that's just some background. And when you look at healthcare costs, you really have to look at what some of those key drivers are that drive costs. So in this healthcare ecosystem in the United States, we have a cure versus prevention ecosystem. And when you talk about curing care instead of preventing care, that drives up costs. It costs more to cure a condition than it does to prevent it. Prices in this country, we just spoke about. 50% of the price, the costs in this country are spent on healthcare providers, hospitals, providers, physicians, et cetera. And our prices are higher in the United States for healthcare services than they are in other countries. We also live in this ecosystem in the United States where we're not really a free market healthcare environment. So we don't really have full control as a consumer to control our healthcare costs and spending and make decisions upon our own behalf about our costs. And all of this also ties into just the lack of price transparency, which APCD, as you all are intimately familiar with and driving the charge on, seeks to help address. And with that being said, it's a good thing that CMS is really focusing on price transparency, and with hospital price transparency rule going into the effect in January of last year, that's really going to help us go a long way towards being able to expose not only cost and rates, but negotiated rates with insurers to the consumer. And with your APCD models, you guys know very well that your activities are helping to drive that even further. So when we look at the types of data that you all are collecting or seeking to collect in the future for APCDs, a lot of these data come from various data sources. They come from your EHR systems. They come from revenue cycle systems that have prescriptions, demographics, data service, revenue service codes, et cetera, that are supporting those claims. And so looking at an APCD strategy, the message is really clear. You have all these disparate data sources that you need to bring together. You need to be able to support large volumes of data. And you also need to be able to scale your data sources that house this data based on the size of the population that you are collecting data on. So when you look at that, you really need a solid enablement strategy that will allow you to capture that type of volume of data, but not only to capture that volume of data, but be able to process it effectively and run analytics on it so that you have better insights into the costs and prices per your payers in your state. So AWS is primed to be able to enable you in those strategies. So at AWS, we are able to pull various data sources into what we call our data lakes. And the data lakes, and what you'll find from healthcare customers, is that they'll pull data in from their electronic health record systems. They'll pull data in from other relational and non-relational databases as well into a data lake that allows you to really house what I'm sure all of you have heard termed as big data, right? Large data sets that we can then use to place analytics on top of, you will, so you can visualize your data, run reports, and get some insights into not only price, but also quality of care per that price. So this is what AWS can enable you to do. Now, when you think about this enablement strategy that we're speaking about and these data lakes and this conglomeration of data rides on what we call our AWS cloud. So to be able to understand this fully, and you should be asking if you haven't yet, what is the cloud? Like, how does this all run? You said this is cloud-based solution. What is a cloud? What is the AWS cloud? So let's talk about that a bit. So when you really think about the cloud, I want to start off by talking about what you typically see in organizations today, healthcare and non-healthcare. So we usually see data centers that are either sitting at your actual organization, and some of you have closets and rack mount space, or you have all these servers doing fancy things. I used to sit in one about 20 years ago myself as an office. And in those data centers, you have servers, you have your storage capability for the data that they're storing, and your actual databases and applications that you run. And you typically access all of those services and applications that you're running at your organization to support your business over a computer on your network. Well, in the cloud-based model, you would move your data, such as to AWS cloud, over to a data center that's not housed physically in your location, but it houses that data center in an AWS secure data center. And that moves your applications, databases, and storage and servers that we talked about in your on-premise environment over to an AWS environment. And then you access those services over the internet instead. So there's various models when you look at that whole trajectory of on-premise versus cloud that you'll see. So most organizations, quite candidly, are still kind of in that on-premises model. I run my data center here all my application, my storage right here at home, locally in a data center that I control. In a hybrid model, you'll start to see organizations say, you know, there are some types of data and applications I want to run here, right? Because of privacy concerns, sensitivity of the data, regulations and whatnot, I'm going to keep those in my data center on premises. But there are some applications and services that I want to move over to the cloud infrastructure and run. So APCD, for example, is a type of data lake or a big data structure that you could run in the cloud, even if you chose to run all the rest of your applications or a hybrid mix of those applications in your on-premises data center. Of course, what we would like to see and hope organizations transition to over time is to run the majority of your applications, such as APCD, in the cloud. And that would be what we call cloud native, like either most of your services or like 90% of them or so are running in that cloud model. Now, we also have what we call a gov cloud. So a gov cloud really is a more secure cloud infrastructure that organizations such as federal organizations that have a higher calling for security and privacy and sensitivity, such as healthcare, for example, may run in that gov cloud secure region. So we have that opportunity as well. So this is the cloud in a nutshell, kind of demystified. It's taking what you have today and moving it to a different type of infrastructure. And you may be saying, and you should ask, you know, what's the benefit of running on the cloud versus in my on-premises data center? When we look at really how we quantify what the benefits are, there are a few. One is that you trade that capital expense for technology for variable expense. So I'm sure you all, I know I've been involved as well over time, develop these capital budgets, what your purchasers are going to be. Technology is probably a huge part of that today. And you try to project that, and it may or may not be accurate. And sometimes that might actually lead to waste and unused capacity. But in this model, you really trade that for variable expense. So in the cloud, your computing services, your push out of applications, databases, processes you may want to run, you do that on demand. You can stand it up and go what we call global in minutes, or push that out in a matter of minutes on a cloud infrastructure, but you can turn it on and off as you go. So you can do what we call stop guessing at capacity. You're going to use the capacity you need at the time based off of your demand. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. And based on the capacity that you leverage and the timing that you use, that really determines what your costs are. So it's really variable, but you only pay for what you need, which is not really how most organizations see their technology spend being today. Then we talk about economies of scale. Everyone wants economies of scale. How can I get technology cheaper? And so with massive economies of scale, this really allows our customers that as we grow and we add other organizations into our cloud infrastructure, we're able to reduce the cost for you as customers over time, because you're sharing not data, but sharing infrastructure, sharing data centers, if you will, and we can continue to reduce your costs. You're able to be more agile. You can increase or push out applications like APCD probably more effectively and faster than you could if you're doing it on premises, having to wait for devices and technology to arrive, getting those things approved, that whole process. This is like an on-demand, on the spot. We know during COVID, that was huge, right? Because supply chain was slow, if not to non-existent in healthcare. I experienced that in myself, but speed and agility. And then we talked about on-premises. We'd really like to see you get away from going to cloud native. Stop spending money on running those on-premises data centers. You can move that to the cloud, make that more efficient. And then finally, security. We talked about security and the fact that we have a gov cloud region. We really focus on security as our top job at Amazon. That is our top most priority. We want you to focus on your data, your applications, and running your business. We want to focus on making sure you have a secure infrastructure to do that on. So we talked about those benefits. And a question I was asked recently was, well, like, is it lower? Is it cheaper to run my applications in the cloud? And that answer can vary based on where you are in your cloud journey, to be quite candid. But overall, International Data Corporation, which really focuses on market intelligence and reporting in the industry, estimates that AWS customers who have transitioned to the cloud have 31% lower cost for operations over 5 years compared to organizations running those applications on premises. So that is a benefit that we are seeing as an average. We're not the only cloud provider out there, that's no secret, but we do have some factors that set us apart. So AWS has really been building and managing cloud since 2006. So we've been in the industry for quite some time. We also have 200 plus services to support any of what we call your cloud workloads. So just think of workloads in simple forms, or just processes or applications that you're running on the cloud. APCD running on the cloud would be a workload, okay? And then how we're structured. So we have what we call 25 regions, and regions are just that, just geographical locations around the globe, several in the United States. And we have what we call 81 availability zones. An availability zone is just, remember we talked about that on premises, like that data center you go in with all the lights and the computers and whatnot. Availability zones are data centers, and they are located in various regions around the world. And then we have what we call edge locations. Think of edge locations as just a faster way to access my data, just like your cache on your computer. I click on a file, it caches in my memory. The next time I go open it, it's going to be faster to open because it's sitting kind of in a different location, if you will. So it's a computer cache, if you will, if you compare it to your day-to-day work. Now, we talked about being able to provide pricing reductions to our customers with economies of scale. And since April 1st of 2022, as of April 1st, 2022, excuse me, we've passed on 112 price reductions to our customers. So that should make you excited. Everyone loves to see pricing and costs go down and not up, right? And then finally, we have a community of over 100,000 partners, whether they be consulting or technology partners. And these are our partners and training partners. And these are our partners that can help you, with your APCD strategy. They understand AWS, our services, how to help you build a strategy and migrate some of those types of data sets to the cloud. And then finally, 8,000 plus marketplace products. That basically means as an AWS customer, you can go on what we call a marketplace, and you can both buy and sell, depending on your affiliation with the organization, different services, products, and solutions, and reuse them that someone's already done the work for ahead of time for you. So we talked about AWS security and compliance. So AWS has hundreds of certifications around security and compliance. The ones that are most pertinent to you, of course, HIPAA. We have 135 HIPAA eligible services in our catalog. We also had, as of a few weeks ago, 137 high trust certified services. We were looking to bring that up to about 155 plus. And so we have an update on that. For those organizations that are running globally, we have 50 plus global compliances, such as GDPR, which we use in Europe as a standard, and then 230 security compliances and 1,800 plus security controls. Basically, any controls on our platform, any security services that we have, our services have been certified. Now, that's the services you use. The data and the workloads you actually run as an organization, you would be responsible for ensuring those are certified, but what we provide to you as standard services themselves are. And you inherit this when you run your workloads on AWS. Now, you may be saying, what if I have to approve your certifications? Where can I go see that you have these certifications? And we have what we call AWS Artifact. That's just a library, if you will, that you can go to and look up the various certifications we have. And if you were audited or asked questions as an organization to prove that our platform was secure and had these specific certifications, you could pull it from AWS Artifact and leverage that information. So then let me top this off before turning over to my colleagues about shared responsibility. So you may be asking, what's my responsibility in the cloud versus what's AWS's responsibility in the cloud, okay? So as a customer, you would be responsible for what we call security in the cloud. So that APC data that you would, the systems and data sources that you'd be running or storing in the cloud, securing that would be your responsibility, right? As well as any applications, what we call identity and access management, which basically just controls who can do what, right? Your operating systems, networking, firewalls, encryption, all of that type of security framework, that all still belongs to you as a customer. Now, what AWS is responsible for is security of the cloud. So you're running APCD in the cloud, but that compute, that storage, databasing, the networking that we leverage in our data centers, we're responsible for securing that as a part of our infrastructure for you. And the hardware and AWS global infrastructure that we just spoke about, such as the regions, the availability zones, which again are just data centers sitting somewhere geographically, and those edge locations which are just, you know, a cache and a fast way to access a file that I use frequently, are all our responsibility. So we say security in the cloud belongs to the customer. We provide you with the tools to do this, but that overall responsibility for your data sets would be yours. Then we have some things like patching, configuration, training. That really is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer and depends on the use case. So that's a little bit about the cloud. And so wanted to give you that feedback, wanted to give you some of our enablement strategies and how we can support APCD. And now I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Karl Fernstrom from Minnesota Department of Health, and he will be followed by Tricia Cox. And they're going to provide you with some real world scenarios of how AWS was used to support APCDs in their state. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Monica. We're just waiting for Karl to get his slides loaded up and take it away whenever you're ready, Karl.
Sure, thanks, Monica. Let me know when you can see my slides.
Looking good.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Monica, and hello, my name is Karl Fernstrom, and I manage the Healthcare Data Service Center in the Health Economics Program at the Minnesota Department of Health. My team functions as the operational side of the Minnesota All Payers Claims Database, Minnesota Hospital Discharge Data, and the state's request Medicare database for Minnesota residents. And we oversee the data collection and aggregation, data contracts, and represent the business for IT projects related to these data sources. So today I'm going over briefly our experience in Minnesota migrating to a cloud infrastructure. But first, a little background on the Minnesota APCD. The Minnesota APCD is a large-scale data system on Minnesotans' healthcare transactions that include enrollment, medical, and RX files. And we have most of the Medicare and Medicaid population in the state, and prior to 2016, a large portion of the commercial population. But as many other states have seen, we realized significant drops in data submissions from self-insured data post-Go Bay. The database is over 2.5 terabytes in size now, and we've been collecting data for about 14 years now, approximately 200 million medical claim lines annually and 85 million pharmacy claims, representing 4 to 5 million Minnesotans annually who are covered by commercial Medicare or Medicaid insurance. This slide is just a high-level timeline of major milestones for the Minnesota APCD. Like I said, we were established in 2008 in statute and issued rules in 2009. Initially, the Minnesota APCD's primary use case was to do provider transparency reporting. It was a very contentious use in the state, and the legislature changed that in 2014 to be more driven towards the research, towards the triple aim on healthcare cost, access, quality, those sorts of analyses, legislative analyses. The next year, the legislature added a mandate for us to publish public use files annually that can be downloaded over the internet. And we've recently done a major update to those, adding some interactive dashboards. I encourage everybody to go take a look. And the migration piece is in the middle of this timeline. It's about the time I started with the agency. We were doing a study on, how to more effectively use our data. And the state overall was entering into kind of a cloud contract with Amazon. So it kind of made sense to do the migration. So we migrated, I think it was May 2019. And we operated kind of dual environments for a little bit during that year just to make sure things are right. But, I think we were done within, a couple quarters, if memory serves. And then just some more recent activity. We did the Puff dashboard updates. We have some new Puffs in there as well, and made some major design changes to those that went out last month. The legislature in Minnesota is also interested in expanding access to the Minnesota APCD. So we're doing a legislative study, which is due at the end of the year, on how we can expand access outside of the current primary user, which is only the Minnesota Department of Health. So why did we migrate? One of the major motivators behind the cloud migration was a statewide centralization and cost-saving effort by the Minnesota IT Services, which is our technology partner agency in the state. So portions of this centralization were mandated by the legislature, and MDH was one of the first agencies in the state to begin migrating its application portfolio, and the Minnesota APCD was one of the first projects within MDH. And the decision-making was driven by the Minnesota APCD's high total cost of ownership. And around the same time, HEP had received some federal grant money that could be used for IT modernization efforts. So the stars kind of aligned, and we started engaging in the project. So we engaged a vendor on evaluating our existing system and making some recommendations for modernization. And the report recommended we move away from a pretty antiquated model that was designed to create bulky SAS data sets for analysis from an on-site Oracle database, and move toward more modern infrastructure. And like I said, the primary factor in our decision to move the APCD to the cloud was cost. We were able to more than double our infrastructure footprint, adding additional servers, storage, and newer database technologies that were quicker, higher performing, at a monthly cost to us that was well under what we were paying for our on-site solution. Another major benefit was that we quickly realized was the near instantaneous nature of procuring resources once you're kind of operating in a cloud environment. With on-site solutions, if we determined the resources we needed, we had to do a lot of planning to make those decisions, and then there would be a months-long delay before we could actually implement the solution as we went through procurement, waiting for delivery of the resources, waiting for installation, configuration, things of that nature. With the cloud infrastructure, ordering, delivering, installation can be completed within a few button clicks, and the configuration can start within minutes. So it saves a lot of time on the setup side of things. In addition, the cloud gave us flexibility to reconfigure our resources as needed, such as adding or storage or shutting down and deleting resources when no longer needed. If we determine the size or the configuration of our data set or database or system was incorrect, we could easily migrate to a new resource and stop paying for the old resource. And we weren't, locked into a contract that we just had to live with. We also improved the overall user experience. So the query performance, the tools available to users, we reduced instability that existed in our old system caused by disk space issues, and virtually eliminated downtime, thereby increasing productivity. And finally, we took the opportunity to enhance the value of our data at the same time by reducing the time it takes to prepare the data for analysis through additional cleaning and standardization efforts, and trying to enable interactive reporting. So what do we learn from the cloud migration? Well, first, this was a lengthy learning curve for MDH. Since MDH was one of the first agencies to begin migrating its data to the cloud, we didn't have much internal expertise to help guide us. And additionally, because the Minnesota APCD was one of the first projects in the agency, this created a steep learning curve for us. on everything involved in all the decisions. We found it especially difficult comparing physical and cloud concepts. A lot of our IT staff and experts were, super experts in the physical server sizes and space and all that sort of stuff. And then moving that to kind of like the cloud concepts of pay as you go was a challenge. Initially, we misunderstood the pros and cons of certain storage types used in our initial configuration and needed to reconfigure our data processes shortly after go live to use different storage types. That said, because of that reduced time and effort required to make these types of changes using a cloud provider, we weren't affected for very long compared to a traditional on-site deployment. Later on, we had severe performance issues related to our main storage drives, and we realized we were having our performance throttled or limited by AWS. And after fully understanding the AWS rules for performance and billing related to storage, we reconfigured that storage to avoid having performance limited and while still maintaining an acceptable cost structure. So there was a lot of, learnings as we went along, but they were short-term problems from my perspective. And because cloud computing was still relatively new at the time, it was new to state agencies for sure. Licensing some of the analytics software, like we use SAS as our main analytic tool, was difficult because the vendor hadn't yet restructured their contracts to accommodate cloud installations. So that took longer. We had to engage our security team and our AWS technical staff to ensure we were doing everything we could to ensure proper security configuration. And when you consider that the cloud it's really your server is a virtual server sitting on top of a physical server that's being shared by other virtual servers, which are owned by other customers, there was a feeling we were taking a risk and trusting Amazon or any other cloud provider to keep our data and resources separate from others' data. And we address these concerns by establishing a very deliberate set of security controls, things like VPN use and multi-factor authentication for all users, and security groups which only allow access to specific IP ranges, and utilizing our own VPC account separate from the other MDH resources. Also, the cost planning was more complicated. It left, if left unchecked, cloud charges can grow quickly as utilization grows, and we didn't really have a great sense for how much we're using. I think it's not really something we had to track that closely before. And so to mitigate these risks, we took advantage of the vendor's reserved instances and savings plans. Both plans allow for us to prepay up to 3 years worth of utilization at heavily discounted prices. So a lot of planning had to go into those purchases. It kind of seems a little bit more complicated on the front end, compared to what we were used to doing. Because once you complete that purchase, you've now paid for the utilization, even if you don't use it. So depending on your system needs, could be more cost efficient to actually pay for the non-discounted on-demand charges and shut down the server when you're not using it. And we do use that on-demand purchasing model workflow for certain analytical processes. You just have to remember to shut it down when you're finished, or you're going to incur additional costs. And so finally, we underestimated the effort to onboard users and create documentation. And this was a heavy lift. We didn't really plan for it appropriately. And the outcome was it took longer to get buy-in from users and created uncertainty in the system. So if I had to do it over again, I would spend more time on that effort. Thank you. That concludes my presentation, and I'm going to hand it off to Tricia Cox to speak about the Utah experience.
Thank you, Karl. And I believe Tricia does not have any slides, so go ahead whenever you're ready, Tricia.
Okay, hi, my name is Tricia Cox. I am the IT director for the state of Utah for the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we've got a pretty broad experience with the implementation of cloud services. Today, we have about 170 instances of cloud environments within Department of Health and Human Services. And of those, about 45 of those, that amounts to about 45 applications that we have in our cloud services. They're a mix right now of applications that are both hybrid and cloud native applications. And so we we have an end goal though of getting all of our applications moved into a cloud native environment. And in total, our goal is we should have about 300 different applications into our cloud environment. So why did Utah decide to move into AWS? So some of the things, we started down this road about 4 or 5 years ago of trying to look at how do we improve our security posture and how we manage data. Some of the things that we really struggled with implementing in our on-prem world was a redundancy and disaster recovery. It came at a very high cost, but we knew the importance of it. So those were high on our list of items we needed to implement as we moved into this new world. We also, some of the big influences we had was we had some really old applications that we've been using, and some of them were unsustainable and unsupportable at the point. And so while they stayed in an on-prem world, and so moving them into the cloud has allowed us to scale our IT infrastructure quickly and easily to support this influx and get them into a place where they're more sustainable. Some of the other things, and similar to what Karl was saying, is some of our big influencers on moving into the cloud was we really wanted to improve our security posture. There are threats coming in from all over the place, and it was important for us to find tools that allowed us to quickly identify security threats. So with moving into the cloud, we've been able to implement automated healing, alerting, auditing, and using new tools to identify vulnerable configurations. So, which has been really nice for our developers. We were able to run tools that tell them where they've done things, configurations that were wrong. And so we're able to fix it before it ever goes live. As well as we've been able to improve our blocking of malicious attacks. So some of the challenges that we've had are very similar to what Karl was saying, is that we weren't sure moving into this with costs, how this would affect our bottom line. It was so new at the time that we were implementing this. Like I said, we started about 4 or 5 years ago moving down this road. And we weren't sure like how things would line up versus on-prem costs versus in the cloud. Some of the impacts that we've seen in whether the cost would go up, down, or neutral is the thinking was very different when these applications were set up than how we think about applications today. In instances where people had shared databases and shared servers, we found that the costs are really generally higher than what they were in an on-prem world because they were sharing so many things. It wasn't the most secure way that the applications were set up, but because they shared so many services, the cost went up when we separated those out into individual environments. Applications where they were set up the same way we do them today in individual environments, and they had their own databases and servers, the cost generally went down. And so those are some of the things that we learned along the way. And with cost, some of the problems that we also encountered with the cost is we have multiple places we have to bill the cost to. And one of the pieces that we really struggled with is how to interpret some of the costs coming across from our cloud, from Amazon, who was our cloud provider, how to interpret those, how to get them to the right billings. And so we spent a lot of time learning about tagging of cloud services and the importance of that to best identify who these services belong to and make sure that things were billed correctly to the right folks. Some of the other challenges we saw was cloud development skills. Working in the cloud is very different than what skills are needed in working in an on-prem environment. And so we had to spend a significant amount of time bringing my staff up to speed and getting them training. We had really good partners we worked with, and I scheduled probably 3 to 4 different trainings a year and had like lunch and learn sessions with them, shorter lunch and learn sessions with my staff. Every Monday afternoon, we would have them together learning about some kind of a skill, and then bigger week-long trainings we did about 3 to 4 times a year to get them up to speed on how to work in these environments. it has paid off. I mean, we're about 5 years down the road, and I have a really great staff who understands and knows how to work in the cloud. I would heavily emphasize to anybody new starting this journey, the importance of investing in training or people who understand how to work in the cloud. It is definitely a different environment. Some of the other challenges that we had encountered along this journey is that there weren't any rules of the road. We were the very first department in the state of Utah to move into the cloud, and there were no rules of the road that existed for developing in the cloud. And there was not a support model either for developing in the cloud as we started moving into this. So we had to work with our state networking group, our security groups, and they weren't sure how to work in this world. And so we ended up, my team ended up having to write policies and rules that we would have to give to people so they can go poke holes in what we had written. And it was a lot of work to write those rules of the road, and being the first adopter of cloud environments. So one of the things that I find great, feel like was a really big success for us in this also, along with that challenge, as we wrote the rules, our rules that we were writing for our department became the rules that we adopted for our state on the whole. And I think that the work that we did to implement and write the rules of the road helped the rest of the states start to be able to make this journey into the cloud. One of the other things that we feel was really big is that there was a big cultural change in how we did business. We also, as we were moving our applications to the cloud, we were also working on a consolidation. We had separate departments of health and human services. And so as we started moving into the cloud, and we had buy-off from one department, then all of a sudden had to start bringing in another department with us to, as we consolidated into one, to bring along the philosophy of why we're doing this and the importance of these moves to the cloud, to the security and our backbone of health and human services, to moving into the cloud. So biggest challenge that we had in this, though, along with all these other things I've been mentioning, is security requirements. So it goes along with the policies, but we really found also as we started moving into this, we knew we wanted to improve our security posture and put all these things in, all this goodness that could help us be more secure, but we did not have enough security people as we were moving into the cloud to help us work through the technical issues. So again, we had to help write some of the rules of the road, even for our security group, and help them upskill as well to be able to help us with this move and the adoption of health and human within health and human services of the AWS cloud. And so I would say biggest with that lesson learned is the importance of getting your partners up to speed as well. And it's not just about, for me, it wasn't just about my team, it was about all my ancillary team members that I also had to bring around into this cultural change of living in a cloud world. Some of the ways that we overcame these challenges with the cultural change of this is we did a lot of trainings. I had a lot of meetings with everybody across the state, security people, policy people, department heads. We had a lot of collaboration and help with the documenting of the rules of the road. And like I said, you know, it was a lot of letting people poke holes in our work and tell us where we did it wrong. And it was, at some points it was really painful, but overall, I think it was really good to start getting people acclimated into what it looks like to be in the cloud. Overall, I would say that we are really happy that we moved into the cloud. I know we still have a lot of work to do, but overall, we're heading in the right direction, and we've come leaps and bounds in improving our security posture across health and human services for our applications. We have a lot of work left to do here, but it's been really awesome to see the change in our security of our applications over the last several years. So. That's it.
Sorry, I got bit by the mute monster. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Tricia. Thanks, Carl, and thanks, Monica. We have a few minutes here for Q&A. I have not seen anything question-wise come in the chat so far, but if there is anybody who does have a question, now would be a great time to bring that in. And if not, I have a couple of questions prepared and ready to go, but I would rather hear questions from the audience. We'll give that just another second. So let me just ask a real quick question then. And this could be to anybody, but especially maybe to Karl and Tricia. Knowing what you know now, would you have done this sooner, or do you think that the timing was about right? Or in retrospect, how has your comfort level gotten with cloud-based solutions? And then we do have a question in the chat right after that too. So Karl, Karl and Tricia.
I'll take it first if you don't mind. Well, if you asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said maybe a little too soon, because we ran into a lot of the same issues Tricia was talking about, where we were developing the expertise on a small team and having to kind of spread that knowledge through our agency and through the wider state of Minnesota sort of IT structure. But now looking back, I think it was probably about the right time to go. But you know, from a user's perspective, I would have done it as soon as possible, because it was really inefficient, and you know, from a management perspective, it was really cost prohibitive, our old system. So it was a major improvement, and now we're pretty comfortable operating. The rest of the agency is comfortable operating. We're in multiple clouds now, so we've been developing skills not only in AWS but Azure and probably Google and somebody else. But yeah, I think it's been an overall positive impact for MDH.
Okay, Tricia, what do you think?
Yeah, and for us here in Utah, I mean, we would absolutely have made this decision again. It's been a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it. We have seen so much improvement in our security, and knowing what I know now, I probably would have done things a little bit differently, but we absolutely, I mean, I wish we could have been further into this prior to the pandemic. Some of the tools that it allowed us to scale and to be more nimble in how we responded even to the pandemic would have been easier had we been further along this road. And we definitely, I'm a proponent of moving this direction. It's been very helpful.
Okay, great. So we have now two questions for Monica. One has to do with use cases and cost. So I'll just shorten this down for you. Can you give a couple of examples of real world examples about cost savings that would help justify moving it over? And then the second one is related to security. How can PHI be protected when data are stored in the cloud? And maybe that's even a better question for Tricia, who is focusing on this one. So Monica, why don't you take the first one, and then I'll have Tricia take that second one.
Absolutely, sure thing. So to Kinley, to your point, costs can be a bit complex, as Tricia and Karl have also noted here. Some of this really depends on how you're architected in your infrastructure, what services you're running, and whether or not the workloads you're running are truly optimized. So we have services that can do some total cost of ownership activities with you, and also look at ways that we can optimize your costs and get a better prediction on that. So we have a service for that. So it's a little bit more nuanced to a site per site. I can follow up with some statistics of some cost savings, but what I'd really like to offer is some time with you, Kinley, to talk about your specific organization with me and some of my peers, and we might be able to more effectively talk about how you can get to break even. Does that sound fair?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And I think maybe you could follow up with Kinley later to kind of help pencil out some ways of making that work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Tricia, PHI, and remember Monica had a slide that divides up responsibilities, and I think this kind of falls on the customer side. How can PHI be protected when data are stored in the cloud? What steps are you taking and to make sure that PHI is protected?
So we are in so in some of our environments, we're in GovCloud, and we ensure that we're in FedRAMP environment to make sure that we have all the security pros in place. As well, we are following the NIST moderate standards. If anyone's familiar with those, sorry, to ensure that we have all the protections and our guardrails up to ensure the safety of our applications. We have implemented we have encryption on all of our environments while the data is at rest. And we have the thing that's been really cool that we've done in helping to protect our data is also that we've got auto alerting on a lot of these things as things are hitting us, or if we have detections that we have put code in wrong, we have better alerting than we ever had in an on-prem world to tell us that we have a code that we put in wrong that might be compromising something, and we're able to get it fixed really fast if somebody inadvertently goes in and changes things. And so but I mean, I think one of the main things is that encryption that we have also that we have in storage as well as in transit to make sure we're securing our data. And as we go through these different implementations. So I think long story short, I mean, those are how we are protecting our PHI.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we are at the end of our hour. So I hope that answers your question, but if not, you are welcome. I can get you in contact with any of the presenters, and if you want to follow with them later. Thank you all for being here today. This is a very interesting topic, and one that a lot of people are thinking about and trying to understand and figure out how it would work for them. So we're glad to have you all here today. And like I say, if anybody does have any questions, just shoot us an email, info@nato.org, and we'll be happy to get you in touch with the presenters. Just a couple of quick programming notes. Our next webinar is coming up next week, and that will be the Spotlight Series Capstone. If you have not registered yet for the Spotlight Series Capstone on Health Equity and Disparities, please do so right away so we can get you invited to that one. And then just another programming note, September 25th is the last day to get the early bird discount for our annual conference registrations. The annual conference, the main conference is October 25th to 27th, but we do have Igniter sessions starting October 5th, on the 5th, 12th, and 17th. So we would love to see everybody again at all of those sessions. Hopefully that works out for you all. And with that, we're going to wrap up and conclude. Thank you everyone for your time. Thanks Monica for helping to put this together, and thank you Tricia and Karl for your excellent presentations.
Thank you.